Welcome, everybody. Thank you for persevering through the day. It's the last talk, so hopefully we'll have some fun. Thank you to my panelists for joining me, Carla, Khalid, and Jeihan. I think before we start, I'll give a little bit of context. I know I was introduced as the coordinating director for the UAE National Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, so not at Expo. And we do the art and architecture exhibition every year. And this past year was the architecture, and the question asked was, how will we live together? Which I think is a very appropriate question that will continue and is very relevant to our talk today about materials and sustainability. So before we begin and I start asking you a few questions, I think let's not assume that everybody knows who you are and what you do. I'm going to ask each of you to give me your elevator pitch. So your 3-minute, what do you do, and who are you? Carla, why don't we start with you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. And I don't have an elevator pitch, but I'll try to make one up. I'm Carla. I am a cultural entrepreneur. I have been so for the past 15 years. I'm the founder and owner of 3 companies and 1 NGO. And what I'm here, like the title of today is Space 10 founder and director. And Space 10 is IKEA's global innovation lab. I think you all know IKEA. Mm-hmm. And I founded that 6 years ago, and I lead that. And yeah.
Okay.
And then I'm a rebel. We get into that maybe later.
Okay, yes. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Khalid.
Thank you first for allowing us to be here and to be with the beautiful ladies. My name is Khalid Shafar. I'm a product designer. I'm the founder and creative director of my brand Khalid Shafar. I'm specialized in furniture, lighting, and product in general, but my background comes from interior design as well. Started 11 years back, and the journey continues. And I think through this 11 journey, we have touched a lot of points where we are going to discuss today on the panel itself.
Great, thank you, Khalid. Jeihan.
Yes, I'm a visual artist, and I've been involved in painting, but I've been also heavily involved in documenting traditional crafts and working with handloom weavers, and I have a setup called Koel, which has been there for a long time. I also founded an art and architecture college in Pakistan, in Karachi particularly. Currently, I have curated the Pakistan pavilion. The interior of it has been done by me. So it's, well,
here at Expo.
Four decades of working with traditional crafts and documenting them and painting also in between.
Amazing. So we have quite a diverse group here, different backgrounds. So why don't we just get into it? So everyone is talking about sustainability. It's like a really hot topic at the moment. But I guess the question is, especially in your different fields, do we feel we're doing enough? And if not, what are the challenges that you're facing, let's say within your own practice or within your own backgrounds that you feel are issues that we can talk about and maybe talk about some solutions? Who wants to go first? Okay, Khalid, go.
Okay. I think the topic of sustainability, as you said, it's a broad kind of topic, and I think I'm not sure if it is a misunderstood or might have different definition with different people, but I believe I don't think so. There is a clarity on what sustainability is. People mix it sometimes with being environmental or being recycled or eco-friendly and more or less. But sustainability for me is like, I think, and even within my domain, I would say is the continuation of the cycle itself. So we need to make sure it's sustainable, it exists, it lives, and it's continue regardless of the evolvement or let's say the evolution of life and economy and people. With our domain, when it comes to design in particular, I think with sustainability comes touching different areas. So when it comes to craft, for example, how we integrate that in our own designs as well, in our own practice. Either it's an ancient craft, it's a vanishing one, it's an existing one. How can we transfer it to the next generation? How we can inspire more or encourage more emerging designers to join the troop as well, and to kind of educate the customer side as well, because it's an ecosystem. It cannot work from just a supply chain. It have to work from both sides. There's lots of elements got involved in that: authenticity, original design, materials, and there's a lot it goes into. But I think it's all start with understanding what sustainability is on all aspects.
So for you, let me ask you a question. I know you work a lot with wood in your practice. Can you talk a little bit about that? And especially since wood is not necessarily a material that's easily found in the UAE, how do you
now with
deal with
the wood in particular? Yes, I agree. I mean, we don't find it, let's say, or we don't maybe have forests here in terms of like using the wood, but I worked closely, for example, with the American Hardwood Export Council, and one of their mission is mainly to promote hardwood, American hardwood, in terms of sustainability itself. And it was very interesting because I worked with them for the past few years in different projects, and it was very amazing to see how the calculation happened on any finished product or objects, that in terms of like the amount of wood we use, the amount of the process that's involved into it, and then in how many seconds all this wood's used can be regenerated in the American forest. Mm-hmm. So the recent one, like 1 year ago in Design Week, we've been commissioned to create, me and other fellow designers to do like benches for COVID kind of social distancing and using certain species. I was shocked to understand or to know that my bench, actually, it takes only 7 seconds to generate all the wood used in it. And it's like a 2 meters bench. And that was the interest of understanding what sustainability, we thought like by preserving the wood, we could mainly preserve the natural resources, but it's the other way when it comes to wood and forest. So you have to use them so in order for them to grow and to be sustainable. And that's why they encourage the use of certain species, because we need to cut the trees and then they can grow. And that's where I say sustainability is, we need to understand what does it mean. It's to keep that cycle going and growing as well with it. So this is where I think when it comes, so if it comes to the local materials, we might find that wood is not available, but what are the alternatives we can use? Mm-hmm. Palm trees, other, let's say, desert plants or flowers or leaves.
Okay, so it's understanding the actual material itself and is regenerative. Jihan, maybe you can talk about, I mean, I know Khalid touched a little bit on the idea of sustainability, about being practice and contemporary, like bringing older practices and continuing the traditions, let's say, in maybe a more contemporary way. Can you talk a little bit about what you do?
I also agree with him. I don't think it's been really clearly defined, sustainability. I think it's a buzzword it's more in vogue now, and without really understanding what's happening. But if you look at it in a holistic, global way, I think the entire fashion industry and the whole creative, cultural industry, as we talk about it, is not even touching it. We are not making any efforts to see that it becomes sustainable for the next generation to come. I was, in fact, part of in Jodhpur in 2005, that's 15 years back, they had a UNESCO and World Bank called some specialists to talk about defining a policy, to see a kind of a document that will look into the nations actually protecting and coming up with laws, how you can make it, how do you make cultural, creative industry sustainable. I don't know what has happened, so we have a lot of seminars, we keep talking about things, and then it ends as we sort of disperse. So it's very sad, because I think it's time that, almost like what happened to our lives when COVID pandemic took place, everything was brought to a halt. And it happened globally. It affected all of us. I think it has to begin on a personal note. Can I look at everything that I do, every step that I take, how am I affecting the earth and what am I doing? And particularly with textiles, I think it really has affected this fast fashion, and we can talk about later about mass production. It is definitely not sustainable. So it's time that we all kind of put our personal tight belts on and say that I will look at it, what is my action, and look at it in a global way. It has to happen that all the nations agree on policies to make things sustainable for the next generation.
We're going to come back to some of that. Carla, what about you? What does sustainability mean?
Well, first of all, I agree with what's been said here. I do, however, think that one thing that we're really missing when we talk or having these conversations about sustainability is the elephant in the room, which for me at least is that when we look at the climate crisis that we are intensively facing today more than ever, we often, first of all, tend to focus a lot on CO2 emissions and not everything around that. So the biodiversity, the lack of materials, and so on. But one thing that we are definitely not really talking about, which is the elephant in the room, is the sort of obsession that we have with perpetual growth.
Yes.
Because I think, and that also comes to this idea of scaling everything and making more cheaper and faster and more effective or whatever, but we're so obsessed with this idea of growth that we sort of don't see the fact that even though we have never talked more about climate and green transitions and sustainability and so on, we have the biggest CO2 emissions ever because we're just building this new economy, the green economy, on top of the old economy. So we see it more as an investment potential rather than actually transitioning or looking deeper and more spiritually at this problem, which is how can we actually use our creativity and our imagination to think of something more sustainable than the sort of current new liberal Friedman model idea of economics. I think, so for me, a lot of the problem is inherently in our economic model.
Yeah. Well, I don't think growth is going to go away. It's going to be there forever. Let's find better ways to, let's say, grow our communities, grow our cities. There are definitely more creative ways to find it that are more generous to our environment. I'll give an example. Our curators this year for our pavilion, they're architects. What do architects use? They use concrete. Concrete is one of the largest CO2 emitters, right? So they wanted to try and tackle exactly that question. Building, isn't going to go away. It's happening. So can we do it more responsibly? And what they did is they looked to their environment and they to add for inspiration. And one of the things that we have in abundance here is desalination, salt from desalination. So they were experimenting with that and they found a solution. It's the very early days of a prototype for an alternate to a concrete that doesn't emit CO2. So are there other things out there that we could also experiment? Maybe there's creative ways of being realistic about what our environment is and finding solutions for that. I mean, we've talked about this. Are there any solutions you would like to kind of possibly put out there that we can discuss?
I just feel we need to go slow. We need to be aware of, I think that awareness is not there. So as I said earlier, it's a buzzword. It happens in conferences. We talk about it. But then again, we've got the media. We've got this whole slogan about buy more, want more. The consumerism has taken over heavily. So before you realize that you're constantly, the fashion for anything, you want to change all the time. So the timelessness of something to pause and think and reflect, that has gone. So I think we need to be aware of whatever that we are doing, conscious of all these things.
So how do we make people more aware? Are there lessons learned in your practice with working within the crafts?
I think it has to come through education. It has to be spoken and practiced by the people who are, like, I should be careful that whatever I'm doing, I'm wearing, I'm producing, like he was talking about that he's looking at renewable. But those are the things that have to be spoken about and spread into the public, and not just use terminology, but it has to be in practice that we need to do. And media can play an important role. There can be national strategies and policies that have to come in effect into what is, for example, a simple thing in my part of the world. A lot of craftsmen move from the rural into the urban areas because, like we spoke about economy, there's so much more, there's a demand, and they leave the very healthy environment and move into the urban areas to get more money for what they're doing. And at the end of it, what they're doing is not a sustainable practice, which they were doing in the villages. So I think we've got to be very conscious of economy, that they ought to be paid better wages, be recognized for what they're producing. I think that sort of embracing of the arts need to take place. Give the artisans their, elevate them.
And I think to preserve the crafts and the artisans is so important.
So
I think,
very important.
I mean, in that sense, you could say that I represent sort of the large corporation IKEA, where I think maybe the best for the world is in the future don't have these giants sort of ruling the retail space, but much more the small entrepreneurs and the local producers and the craftsmen. I think really that is the way forward.
Is there a way that, let's say, corporations like IKEA and other entities could learn from the smaller ones or find a way to be more responsible?
I think, yes.
Is there a way?
I think, but I'm also,
or
and
do
I
you dissemble it
hope
completely?
I'm not going to be fired or anything here, but I think it's hard. Like, of course, you can always make things better. Mm-hmm. And I think a company like IKEA is always trying to do that and become more sustainable, become more this and that. But in the end of the day, I think they have already passed the limit for what I think the size of a company should be, to be good for the world and for society.
Yeah.
So I think, in a way, it's like, again, degrowing. Don't grow it, degrow it. But they do, in their being the size that they are, they do the best they can to be.
So you don't see that there's more, for example?
Oh yeah, they can, but they are not stopping. Yeah. I mean, but they're also a family-owned company, a foundationally based company. So they are, not they're not dependent at all on their investors because there are none, which means that they could do a lot more long-term investment in the transition. But I'm not, I'm not a believer in big companies. I'm there to try and disrupt them and make them, accept that.
Okay.
I think the giants play a role in any society. So individuals definitely need to contribute, but then to accelerate sometimes the process depends on who are the key players in each society. I mean, the UAE is like a great example. So the leadership, when they set the strategy and push it, it just like it just integrate everyone and then encourage everyone to contribute to it. Individuals have to have their own responsibilities for sure. Education helps, and then joining efforts together will help, and even will kind of take that voice to the upper scale. But then when there are some strategies and policies in place, it helps in accelerating the spread of that understanding and even taking things seriously, because as an individual, we will push on our own domain, but then to even take it on a wider scale, I think we need the help of the large organization, governments, policymakers. There should be a vision to go towards. So not everyone just working on theirs, and then maybe some KPIs, because we need to. I think to reach to the utmost sustainability as well, we can't reach it on next day. So if we put some KPIs for us and where we want to be in 5 years from now, for example, in terms of using plastic, or let's say cleaning the oceans. And so if we set those small milestones, and then the community and the society will just contribute towards achieving those.
So do you have any KPIs for yourself to be more sustainable, let's say, quote unquote, in your practice, or in terms of materials you use or don't use, or where do you source them from? Because there's also a supply chain issue too, right? Which we saw during the pandemic was severely affected.
Yes.
So how do we also address you know, that issue, the supply chains, where things come from, how long it takes for those materials, let's say, to get to wherever they need to go?
As you mentioned, I think it's for us, we start from the inside, our studios or our offices, and small practice even counts for everything, like in terms of like how much you, let's say, do printings or use papers, or how much you, for example, in your packaging, which is maybe something that people consider like the waste, and they don't look at it. They look at the core product, but then whatever materials goes in the packaging, that's actually, they don't look at that. And I think these are the areas we started with. We are looking at those areas where we are reducing or looking at alternatives and using that. Before looking at the core product itself. I don't think so. At this stage, we claim that we are 100% sustainable, for example, but we do it through the practice and design, and that's one of the things where we take crafts into the contemporary arena. So we encourage a lot of all the crafts of the UAE to come into the forefront of design and integrate it into design with a contemporary touch on it. Because we believe these stories and these crafts should sustain or should survive a longer generation. Foundation and organization like, for example, Nama, which I think they had a talk today earlier, and Earthy and all these initiatives is mainly been set up, or let's say they emerge in order to sustain that particular direction, so sustain crafts into it. However, I really need to highlight that when we do sometimes make craft survives, not necessarily is, for example, the exact way how it used to be, or with the exact materials. Sometimes even the story of it, if it survived through certain products and certain designs, it's a way of sustainability as well. You are keeping the story going on through generations, where it's a documentation of that story itself, but then it's documented through design. So I think we tap into a different way of how either it's the original material itself or the craft that we maybe evolve it and make it more up to our time now, and sometimes the material alone, or sometimes the story of it. And that's where it is the inspiration where we get into it. So within each practice, I think it's always good to look at the inside first before you look at the just outside picture, because I think that's where you set your foundation, and then you encourage your team and the surrounding people to move with you towards that vision itself.
Okay. But you're a small practice, so you have a bit of that luxury to do that with a larger... How would you translate that up, let's say, to a larger entity like IKEA, for example?
I think you see,
the easiest example.
With us, I think if it is, first of all, I'll take it from our landscape. So within the UAE, design here, it's I would say, relatively new. It's been in the past few years only. So we have actually put today, and I do remember, like, a few years ago, we had those kind of brainstorm sessions with the government entities in terms of the economy and the creative economy. And I do remember very well that we talked about the understanding of the contribution of the creative economy to the overall growth of any country. And we need to understand where we are today and where we want to set. And that was a few years ago. Today, when we have this conference happening here, and then everyone is contributing to it, that's mean this kind of brainstorming or these ideas and discussion, it's going through a right direction. We are at the stage now where we want to understand how much we are contributing to the economy. What is this creative economy is doing? Is it what we are considering like a core element of any society economy or not? By understanding this built a responsibility on us to contribute to that, and then we will start setting those KPIs I was talking to, even if we are small into it. This landscape is very potential to large cooperation like IKEA and the rest, because I think these are the new areas they need to tap into it. And then there's a new environment here to look at. They will be discovering new materials that they can integrate in a new product. I understand that they have sometimes certain launches or certain collections that's mainly focused on certain region, and mainly that's where the potential areas to spot. So I believe small is good sometimes because it attracts, and that's why we believe we are like a great catch.
Of course. Carla, I mean, you have multiple different experiences. You've worked with youth a lot also. Do you feel there's something to be said for maybe those solutions are within the younger generations coming up in terms of they're not so biased towards certain thinking? Or should we be tapping those communities more to help us find these solutions?
I think, I mean, that is probably what gives me the only hope, at least the most hope, is the next generation, is youth, is the wokeness of the youth, the acute awareness of the climate crisis. So really prioritizing the focus on the one thing that we all need to focus on, because if we don't, we won't have a planet in maybe, or at least not a livable planet for humans already within 50 or 100 years. I mean, if we look at agriculture, the current way we do agriculture, we will only be able to feed people for another 60 years. 60 years, it's nothing. And that's just one of the many crises that we are facing that we're not talking about because we only focus on CO2. So I think, you know, yes, the next generation is our hope. And I think that what is hopeful about it is not only are they, of course, going to do things in the most circular, sustainable, regenerative way, but they are also going to embrace and hopefully build a new economic system which is not based on growth, but distribution or whatever other value systems we can implement and think of. Because otherwise, you know, this perpetual growth and the sort of whole way that, that we all countries, all companies operate, you know, if we don't grow, we are not considered successful. If a company doesn't grow every year on their sort of sheets, balance sheets, they are considered like there's panic, you know, in the sort of CFO office. And that whole mindset just needs to change. Otherwise, we will not fix the problem. We will just go down. And I know that sounds very dramatic, but it is dramatic. And I think we don't put enough emphasis on that.
It's definitely good to have a bit of drama, especially at the end of the day. We need
exactly.
A
we need
bit.
To stay alert.
But let's also be fair. I mean, just to ask for that mindset to shift so quickly is hard. So, you know, it's one thing to say that these are the problems, but can we offer any solutions? Like, what are tangible ways that we can maybe take steps towards changing that mindset?
Buy less is one. Consume less is one way.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I think also you mentioned that consumerism is been hype. It's so intensified, and we're not even considered citizens anymore. We are talked about as consumers. I get the creeps every time I hear a presentation or, you know, some pitch where people are talked about as consumers. I just cringe, and I think, and we do that all the time. And we need to get back to being humans and not consumers. Be smarter, think more creatively.
Because there's such a disconnect. There's such a disconnect because factories, people who are working in the factories, they have no idea what they're making. There's a disconnect from what they're producing. When an artisan, if they're working on a piece, they're wholly involved. There's that spiritual interconnectedness with what they're doing. But the larger you become, the human is really reduced to a machine part who's just doing something senselessly, have no idea what they're doing. And so there is a whole disconnect. I think it's our responsibility. I 100% agree with Carla. It is the future generation. We are responsible what we are handing out to them. And I think this really needs a very strong strategy globally. That's why I spoke about the pandemic. When COVID can halt everything, could we have ever understood earlier that something like that can happen? But it did. Globally, every individual, all nations came to a halt. So similarly, I think it's a matter of great crisis. We are talking about climate change. We're talking about, like what you just said, what do we see in the future? Don't you think we need to have very strong, focused strategies globally? Because each individual should play their part, but it cannot just happen like that. It's been happening, like I said, these fabulous strategy was laid out 15 years back. Things are on a decline since then. So many crafts have become extinct. The larger are becoming more large. And the same consumerism continues to sort of engulf, and we are headlessly moving in that direction. So yeah, I think strong strategies need to be implemented at the national level. Plus, we have to carry on personally so that the next generation is aware of what we're doing.
I think sometimes incentive could work in certain practice, especially small practice.
Did you say incentive?
Incentive, yeah. I mean, when you
Sorry,
look
I
at
didn't
like
hear.
small practices, if you just put for them certain targets to achieve, in order for them, for example, to get support, certain support, or like certain facilities to grow their practice, but that could encourage at least practitioner to get into this, or to ensure their practice within as the certification we have in terms of leads and others. So this comes on a larger scale, but when it comes to the smaller, I think sometimes we need to encourage them more, educate them, but then encourage them as well to get into it, to practice it, not just like have it. Because with us, when we look at strategy, when it comes and policy making, that comes from the top. Let's say with the government entities or large organization into it. But with the practice as well, I think we need to encourage them to contribute, but then to have their own growth as well within that. New generation coming. Education of sustainability should go and to be integrated in their school times and their university, so they can graduate with this mindset that we are starting a business, let's say, or we are getting into this particular domain or sector, but we are putting sustainability in the core of what we are going to do. So I think we need to encourage them as well, besides just setting the strategy for them.
No, definitely.
And I think, I mean, that's a good point, because I think also that is, you know, my point of view is not that you shouldn't put more entrepreneurs in the world, and it's not that you shouldn't grow small businesses to a certain, you know, to a certain stage. I think for me it's more to think about, so take the US for an example, where it's a prime example of how sort of the market rules all logics, and so everything is being deregulated so that we can have sort of the free market philosophy. And I think those are the kind of things that really are harmful for both the small businesses, but also for society at large. And I think, so for me, I think we need to make sensible regulations, we need to make sensible sort of governmental support systems, and then prioritize the small rather than the big. I think right now we have a world where the big guns, the big guys, the big tech companies and so on, they have way too much control, and they have way too much power. And I think, you know, governments has a responsibility, and we as citizens has to uprise and be activists in the sense that we need to change that. And they need to be regulated.
A revolution.
Yes, for sure.
In materials. Would, just in listening to all of you talk, would, in terms of incentives, maybe an incentive that could be, I mean, we are at a conference here, we're here connecting with government, individuals, entities. Maybe one of the things that could be proposed or as a takeaway is that one of the incentive is, for whether it's a small or a large, is what do you do with your waste material that you produce? So I'm sure in each of your practices, even as an artist, you have waste material. What do you do with that waste material? And giving them incentives possibly to either reshape them or reuse them, and in that way kind of reshift our community's perception towards, okay, we're going to still continue making things, but let's make responsibly, possibly.
But I think that's happening on its own. Like
Yeah,
that
it is, but we
all
need
of those
more.
things. I agree. But I think, you know, as raw materials get more and more expensive because we're running out of them, you know, a business sensible person would immediately start thinking about, okay, how do I reuse materials again and again in as many cycles as possible in order not to have the sort of expense of buying very expensive raw materials. So I think, you know, we are at this point right now where the tipping point has happened, that because we're running out of, you know, finite materials, raw materials,
we have to be more creative
be more creative in how we recycle. So again, you know, IKEA is completely amazing at recycling. You know, I think, I can't remember what their strategy is, but it's to be 100% upcycle, recycle, repairable within, I think, only 10, 20 years or something like this. And they will probably make that. But it's still not going to change that if we are in a growth economy, we're going to still need new materials, because otherwise, how can you grow?
We're not going to change everything here today. We're going to find.
Well, we're going to try.
We're going to try, but let's try within our.
I think even the perspective on recycling or upcycling sometimes comes in a very simple way. People think it's, if this is an upcycled piece, or let's say a recycled one, it shouldn't look good, or shouldn't be classy, or shouldn't be fancy, to be, let's say, mixed with, let's say, I don't know, an art piece or a design object. And I think this is our responsibility as well, for us to put the outcome out of this waste material in a very elegant way, for people to not even believe that this was made completely from recycled material, or let's say upcycled materials, because that's the perception with people now. The minute you say it's recycling, for them it's something like rough, it's very simple, it's not well made. So for us, I think as designers, we need to think about that in terms of like how we present it in a way that it appeals.
And for example, in your practice, are you able to do that?
We do. I mean, you see, it was from the beginning, the very early stage when we start designing the products. One of the things we used was the very simple woven mats done with the local craftswomen here. We were meaning to keep them as they are without interfering into, for example, the colors or the design of it stuff. We take them as they are, but we integrate them in different products like coffee tables and others, for people to understand or to even recognize them immediately, that these are the things that we see and we think like we are buying them just to support these women alone. But today they are put on a very contemporary design, in a very design piece that we can use in our homes. And that was the intention from the beginning. Now, after like 10 years, we continue this practice, but now we start like integrating them in a wider kind of collection and product. But again, we always keep that instinct of the female work behind those pieces. We wanted to be a collaboration.
So authentic.
So it's us and the makers. So it's not only us, and then we control the whole process in terms of how we want it to be made and stuff, and they are just a maker. We want them to be a contributor on this. So I think that was from the beginning, in terms of taking sometimes materials, sometimes simple materials around us, and then how we can integrate them in a design and then make them functional and practical design itself. So we in the practice, I think we think about it from different, so materials comes, but then the people lifestyle as well change. Spaces change from large spaces to smaller, multifunctional pieces that can reduce the use of many pieces or the purchase of many pieces and more materials by having a piece that serve you multifunction in just one room or one space.
I love multifunctional furniture. What about you, Jeihan, with your experience working with craftspeople? Like how realistic is it to reuse or repurpose waste materials?
Oh, because it's like textile, I'm a great believer in recycling. In my own personal clothes, there's all this thing about repair and what we call rafu. There used to be this whole art of darning, which has disappeared now. So yes, in my business, there's a lot of recycling because we work with fabric and textiles. So and a lot of stress on natural dyes. So there's the constant use of, flowers from the tree, bark from the tree, color from the leaves. And what I'm wearing is all handloom and natural dyes, for example. And so there's a constant recycling, and whatever that waste is coming is becoming part of going back to the earth. And that connect is very much there. But this is a very small organization that I have. I think it's such a critical thing. I keep talking about it, that time is really disappearing, and we need to be taking stronger actions and on a more collective, we'll all go back to our own lives, but that kind of regional connection is also important. What you mentioned earlier, that there ought to be sort of more exchange programs of artisans between regions and, well, on a larger scale as well, internationally, but just across borders, I think there has to be interchange of artisans and that respect being given back to them. The small is beautiful has to come back.
Definitely. Well, I think we have like 5 minutes left. Are there any final, I mean, I know we can continue talking, but it is the end of the day, and I'm sure everyone's getting a bit tired. Are there any final comments or thoughts or anything that you would like to share around, I mean, final thoughts around solutions maybe, or small steps that we can take, or some key takeaways that we can share with our audience, or maybe with whoever's listening out there to possibly change their policies? What would you like to say?
Well, I think a lot has been said already, but I think education is for sure a very important factor, that we need to understand both the complexities but also the opportunity space.
Of course.
And I think, as you mentioned earlier, that within fashion, it's so easy to recycle, to be circular if you are small. But as long as you're in fast fashion, that's like, you can't, it's impossible, because fast fashion is based on producing at scale so that they can lower the price and so that we can buy new stuff all the time instead of cherishing something because there's been put love and time and value into it. And so I think, again,
Maybe
we need to disrupt, like we need not to buy fast fashion.
Exactly.
We have that
we should
responsibility.
bring back home economics classes where everyone learns how to sew again.
But
You know,
yes.
I think those
No,
kind
but
of,
that could work
but
to
in value and making of your own, maybe.
And
The
just
consumers or us have to be very aware and conscious of all the decisions that we are not.
Yeah.
And I think the media that has helped spread fast fashion and the brands ought to be the platform, because they have the outreach in an immediate connect. And I don't think much is happening at that front, where you can reach out, and awareness building is so, so very important. Like you said, education, all the schools, colleges. But it's the housewives who are going and buying fast fashion.
But of course, it's also when we are, putting billions of dollars into advertisement to seduce us to buy shit that we don't really need.
So it's a whole mafia.
We're being brainwashed completely.
How do you break the mafia?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think listening to you, I mean, I think it works differently in every part of the world. I mean, with us here in the region, I think there is lots of young initiatives growing in here, and there's a good land for things like this to grow. I think with us, for example, in the country here, it will be good to encourage the key players in every sector, including media, to come up with initiatives. I was so glad to, in a yearly basis, where they are rated into that. I mean, I was so glad to know about the latest national. So for me, this is something like every single sector or every single organization should come up with an idea within their domain itself. So everyone contributing with that. And that encourage us as a smaller or medium. Again, I have to say, like, we have a very potential area, or let's say landscape, to grow. Dubai is based, or Dubai economy is based on mainly, almost more than 40% is based on medium and small companies in terms of economy. So that means we have a very key role to play within the economy from a sustainability point of view. So this is, I think that's how we can even spread the things quickly between us, in terms of like bringing the key players within the country, from government, private sectors, and organization, to come and contribute and show their contribution. Because again, they want to say, they want to shout out and say, we have done that, and then to encourage more people to enter it. Yeah. So I think that this is something we need to encourage. I mean, I know there is the sustainability goals are there, and they are worldwide known, and people are working all towards them. I mean, I'm involved in certain water organization, non-profit organization, and they mainly aiming to reach to certain KPIs they set for themselves. But I think we need to do more into promoting that, making it something that in our yearly review, we have to look at how much we did this year when it comes to sustainability, who have achieved certain targets or reach to that level. And from different sectors, we could look at fashion ones, and sometimes in food, or sometimes in industry like production. So I think we need to look at that from a higher point of view.
Yeah.
But then potential areas like ours, I think, have more chances to grow into the area or into the sustainability domain than others, and it could lead the future with that. Yeah.
Okay,
I
great.
actually want to add also a last
Sure.
word, I think, is I would love to see more women in power,
Yes.
because I think more women in power would also create an approach where growth is like, or the idea of like growth and power would be more maybe focused and refocused on nurturing. So I think, how can we think about a nurturing economy rather than a growth economy? And I think women would be great at leading that.
So
that's
you'll
gonna-
visit our women
love
pavilion just next door, huh? Yeah, so that's a good example for
I think that is a great note to end on. Thank you, Carla. Thank you all, Khalid
you.
and
Thanks,
Nurjahan. And thank you to the audience for being
Sticking
with
out,
us. Yeah,
staying
thank
awake.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks a lot.